It's my pleasure to present to you the moderator and obviously the speakers too. First, como oradores tenemos a las siguientes personalidades. El director general en el Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas y exministro para la Cohesión Territorial de Italia, Fabrizio Barca. Gobernador del Estado de Morelos, Governor of the State of Morelos, México, Graco Ramírez. Embajadora y representante permanente de Chile ante la OCDE, Ambassador Permanent Representative of Chile to OECD, Claudia Serrano. Jefe de operaciones y cofundador de Results for America, David Medina. Miembro del Parlamento del Reino Unido, Member of UK Parliament, David Lammy. Como moderador, tenemos al director de Gobernanza Pública y Desarrollo Territorial de la OCDE. As moderator, we have the Director of Public Governance and Territorial Development, OECD, Mr. Rolf Alta.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us late in the day. I know that we had a fantastic morning, we have a wonderful afternoon, and now we're here for the last session of the first day of this really unique Fifth World Forum. And I'm very grateful that Madame Martine Durand is here with us because nothing works without her. We know that. Thank you very much for being here. We would like to zoom in today in the afternoon to something that I think has a lot of importance for the topic. Would like to talk about well-being, but at the regional, at the local level. In the OECD, we tend to say that it's where policies and people meet. And I think if you see the real experience, there seems to be a lot of truth in it. It is where policies and people meet. To discuss both achievements so far, but also to talk about what are the challenges, we have this fantastic panel with us. I have to say, people of very different walks of life, with very different experiences individually and collectively, and I think that this would make for a very good debate. We want to talk about some of the themes that were addressed during the day. A lot has to do with data. A lot has to do with implementation, with trust, and certainly with delivery. So I would just like to say thank you very much to all of you that you are with us today. Appreciate it very much. And I thought that we will go straight into a first round of short statements of the 5 panelists about achievements and challenges at the local and the regional level. And then we will engage in questions and answers among, of course, the panelists, but I would like you to think about and be attentive to questions that you yourself, either questions that you want to raise or comments that you would like to make. And we will have here ample microphones so that you can present yourself, and please take the opportunity. It's a very well thought and very well organized little exchange that we would like to generate here. So my first invitation goes to Claudia Serrano. As you heard, Madame Serrano is the current ambassador of Chile to the OECD, but she has a very diverse and rich professional experience in academic, but also in the political sphere, in particular with respect to the regional dimension of policies in Chile. So we're very delighted to invite you, Claudia, to tell us either achievements or the challenges, whatever you can do in 5 minutes. Please.
Thank you. Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Muchas gracias a la OSD, a Rolf Alter, mi amigo, al Estado de Jalisco y al INEGI. Es un privilegio poder compartir estas ideas con ustedes. Tengo 5 minutos en la primera vuelta y eso me pone muy tensa, porque no voy a alcanzar a decir lo que espero, pero confío en que habrá una segunda vuelta. Quisiera partir por 3 puntos, 3 conceptos que han sido comentados el día de hoy y yo creo que hay alguna cosita adicional que agregar. El primero es sobre well-being. Celebro profundamente el trabajo que ha hecho la OECD en abordar las estadísticas de bienestar. Considero que la gran diferencia respecto a nuestros países en América Latina es que esta conversación sobre bienestar se está desarrollando en el seno de una discusión sobre el desarrollo económico o el bienestar entendido al interior de una discusión sobre crecimiento y sustentabilidad. Porque los países de América Latina nacimos discutiendo sobre bienestar y calidad de vida porque ha sido una huella dolorosa para nosotros.
Claudia, I'm sorry that I interrupt you, but there is no translation in English yet, so I would like
Creo que no hay interpretación.
what you're saying is to be translated. Would you check again, please? Can we then get this? Yes? What is it? 5?
It is ready now. The interpretation is ready now. A ver. Okay, here we go again, sir. Well-being, as I was saying, means to me, on the terms of Matthias Sen, that are the same terms from the Directorate of the OECD, when we talk about Sen Stiglitz V2C, we are talking about the expansion of the capacity of people to expand the threshold of freedom. We are not talking about life quality standards, but we are talking about the capacity of developing full capacity as individual, and that societies allows us to do this. And the same reflection applies to territories. And the direction of this brief presentation is to talk about territorial cohesion in the understanding that it is the potentialization of all territories to develop their potential at the most of their capacities. That is at least the opportunity that all territories should have to fully develop their potential. That is number one. Number two is what we talk about is averages. We have been talking about new data that we need. Nonetheless, we never talk about public policies in order to truly understand, and we truly focus on the average, because the average is like a signal, like a warning. The average per capita income gives us a signal in terms of trends in our countries, but does not really allow us to discriminate where are the problems, where are the turning points, where are all of those things that we see in one way or another and that are not working. And the example that was mentioned this morning in terms of life expectancy, how can it vary in 4 or 5 years in Mexico or in the US? Or the teenage pregnancy, how can it vary so much? Or access to education or indicators that you name. So the important thing here is to accept that the average can be deceiving at times, and not only in Latin America. And so that is why it's important to speak to the OECD countries nationwide, or internationally rather, and regionally, to talk about the dimension that we wish to analyze, because we will find territorial differences. And for that, this is a paper by the OECD by RIMIS, with seat in Santiago de Chile, that has developed statistics for territories with several countries with several indicators, and so they know their thing. I'm not going to be mentioning the different indicators, but in all the dimensions and in all indicators, there are brutal differences from one territory to the other. And not only in Chile and not only in Latin America, but at an international level, we are experiencing this. As mentioned, with no data, we don't have visibility. We cannot compare, we cannot measure, and we cannot make the right decisions. But the Secretary General a while ago also mentioned, and I am going to disagree this one time, I usually agree, but he said with data we can act, but with data we need still political conviction and technical capacity, because that is the tool that we need. And then of course we need to be able to imagine the type of policy that inspires data. And so I would like to make the difference among 4 different policies that I believe need to be present upon thinking about territorial development with true cohesion. One unquestionably has to do with sectorial policy that is embraced at a national level. Territorial, regional is not against the state, it is for the country. And that's why I wish to say that sectorial policy needs to be able to tune up with the territorial reality, or that stakeholders at a local and territorial level should be able to interpret and manage national recommendations. All of you surely have examples of a mandate that is very vertical to be applicable, and that we do know, because we have the experience in the field, that that measure does not necessarily is going to be that pertinent, and that we need to adjust. We need to speak to the national authority. We need to tune up that or adapt it to the territorial reality. Then the gap politics, because that, or gap policy, because that needs to close the gaps among territories. Now, decentralization and empowerment at a local level and at a regional level, that is number 3. And number 4, to truly open the door without centralism to territorial policies. Here we've heard, and we will listen, I'm certain, to the Mr. Governor of Morelos, as we heard the governor of Jalisco talking about democratically elected authority that is channeling territorial policy aimed at territorial reality. What are we missing if we don't do this? What is the true risk that we might be running? And not because I have you here, I'm going to quote Fabricio Barca in his report from 2009, because there are efficiencies that are in an economic and in a social environment. And I also would add institutional and democratic level. But I want to focus on the social, because we cannot cope with exclusion if we do not do this. And that consolidates what we said this morning. That is that the territory where you are born determines your future development, and that should not be accepted. And due to economic efficiency matters, because territories have their own assets, they have their own capital, they have their own resources, they have memory, they have people, natural resources, and economic memory, and entrepreneurship, and of course memory in terms of success or failure. And if we do not see that, if we do not measure, if we do not call them by name and incorporate them, then we cannot generate this virtuous value chain that can contribute to economic opportunities for these territories. And I would like to wrap up by saying that Chile is going to preside the annual meeting for the board of OECD in 2016. And Chile is suggesting that the group of finance ministers should talk about productivity, thinking exactly on what I just mentioned. in those territories and spaces and entrepreneurial efforts that are segregated from the dominant circles, but that do have potential when we talk about public policies. And I think that territorial matters are a must.
The passionate description of the very many dimensions. I like very much, Claudia, that you talk not about just data, but data need a narrative and you need a political environment to become action. Thank you very much. Great start. May I then ask David Lammy to speak about his point of view on achievement and challenges. And let me just add, David, you're a parliamentarian. So by definition, decisions are made in the parliament. Let us know what you have achieved as a country, but also what the challenges perhaps are in the UK that remain. Please.
Well, thank you very much. I am a parliamentarian. I'm the Member of Parliament for Tottenham. I represent a constituency in the north of London. It is a constituency where over 200 languages are spoken. It's largely seen as the most diverse constituency in the world. And no doubt we will have more Syrians in Tottenham in the coming weeks. It's that kind of place. So my perspective on well-being is really about representing, if you like, the underbelly of the city, a tough area. We have made progress in the UK to the extent that David Cameron, our Prime Minister, made it very, very clear 8 years ago that we would not just measure GDP, we would also measure GWB, general well-being. And we do that. The data is now collected. Central government has made it their absolute aim. Cities and towns and areas across the United Kingdom compete. Which town is the happiest in the country? Which area is the saddest in the country? And if things aren't happy in your town, you want next year not to be in that place. So in that sense, the data is important. But Claudia is absolutely right. Unless you have a strategy, not just from national government, but from local government, and that strategy is about not just objectives, but about delivery, how you deliver against those objectives, I'm afraid you can have all the data, but the system, shifting the system from just growth to looking at well-being is incredibly hard. Let me tell you a little story to indicate how slow it is. It's just a joke. A woman came to see me. The wonderful thing about being Member of Parliament in Britain is that we have to see our constituents. They come and see us every weekend with their problems. She came to see me. She was Jamaican. She was in her 80s. She had a small problem with benefits. I helped her with that problem. At the end of that, she said to me, she told me a story about traveling on a train in Jamaica. The train was going very, very slowly. And an American was sitting opposite her. I don't want to offend any Americans, but he got more and more agitated. In the end, he stormed up the middle aisle of the train. He knocked on the driver's door and he said to the driver, "Can't you go any faster?" And the driver said, "I can go faster, but I've got to stay with the train." This is how our governments are approaching well-being. It's very, very slow, but thank you for coming and staying with the train. So you have to have a strategy. That strategy is not just central, it is indeed local as well. And there is an opportunity, it seems to me, and I want to just talk in a sort of bigger... The opportunity is effectively austerity, because well-being, time and time again, saves money. So there's an agenda that can be attractive to those who are on the centre-right of the political spectrum, but equally, because you are talking about issues other than just growth, there is an agenda that is attractive to those on the centre-left, or the left of the political spectrum. What have we found in Britain that's important? It's been important to get cross-party consensus. We wanted to get this and had to get this into our political party's manifesto. Every party approaching well-being from their own perspective. Once it's in the manifesto, you might be able to get them to implement it down the line. So you have to be cross-party about it. It's not just something that must be owned by the bureaucrats, it's got to be owned by the politicians as well. David Cameron has led, but the challenge for us in Britain is that local government doesn't own it. Local authorities are not tested against it. And there's a real issue as how you cascade down from central government ownership at a local level. And let me just touch on a couple of policy areas where there's some real challenges. At the moment, Treasury departments, those who are handling the economy and the money right across the developed world, those Treasury departments to drive up GDP are very, very keen that women should be in the workplace. Now that's Treasury ministers because it helps productivity. There is of course an equality discussion about women in the workplace, but I'm just saying that Treasury departments see it from a productivity. If women are working and men are working, great. Problem is, on the well-being score, childcare. And unless children are being taken care of, both formally and informally, I'm afraid that doesn't work. So here is an agenda on well-being that both increases productivity but leads to the well-being of the family. And time again, what we're seeing is the well-being agenda gets us back to the human core, which is the family. It's why you're hearing more and more about mental health and how we can support mental health. We came up when we looked at this report in Parliament in September 2014, and if you put well-being and you put Parliament, you'll see our all-party report. There was a new fad on the fringes called mindfulness. In a way, it's an updated version of meditation. Actually, educationalists have begun to pick up this idea of mindfulness. How does a teacher approach teaching in a mindful way? How do you get students to focus, to slow down in a mindful way? Simple thing that we discovered in schools that wasn't happening. If students drink water in the class, their brains are better able to absorb. If they're dehydrated, there's no learning. Water, very simple, cost effective. So what I'm saying is the well-being agenda does not have to cost lots of money, actually. It can be very, very helpful to Treasury departments, helping them to carry on with their productivity, but also having a cross-cutting approach to well-being. I think that's the basic point I would want to make. Get it into the political manifestos. How do we bring it down locally? But how do we help those in Treasury departments see it as something that's an ally, not something that's pulling against productivity and making more and more money?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. Really. I'm sure you're making today the day for all budgeteers. It doesn't cost money, but it is more well-being. Great, great line. Thank you very much. I would like to then turn to Fabrizio Bacca, I have to say, good friend of the OECD, no doubt about it. He has been for many years heading our Regional Development Committee with courage, with creativity, and with a lot of energy. So, Monsieur Fabrizio, please.
Great. a change of scenery, but in fact a follow-up on what we just heard. There is a picture that I wanted to show you, but if it appears, fine. Otherwise, you can imagine an Italian countryside. We're completely changing. We are not in an urban area now. We are in inner areas of a country, in an inner areas of Italy. But the issue is exactly the same. I'll try to give you the taste of a strategy about delivering, that's what you call it, using well-being indicators and trying to extract information from people living in the communities. So in fact, the purpose of the exercise that we are trying and running at the moment in my country is promoting and shaping, here's the kind of place, not exactly Tottenham, promoting and shaping a heated, open and informed debate among citizens in small areas, in small communities, and let me add, destabilizing the existing local leaders when, and it is very often, they prevent willingly innovation because they fear for their own interest. We are, as I said, in a completely different area. We are in inner areas of the country. Italy has an extraordinarily diversified cultural and natural context, which is fantastic for economic development, but is also matched, this diversity, by an extraordinary power of local rentier, of local economic and political leadership, to just keep the status quo because they're worried that any change might make them losing their power. If you don't tackle this tiny little issue of power, there is no point in using indicators and designing any policy. The story concerns these areas. We're talking about anything between 1/3 and 2/3 of the Italian territory, 1/3 and 2/3 of the Italian territory. Italy is very rugged, so that means that about 20–25% of the people in my country live quite far away from essential services. There is not an issue of quality, it's an issue of accessibility. Accessibility to a full offer of schools, accessibility to a full offer of health, and accessibility to the railway system that, thank God, in my country is still well and alive. So this remoteness, we try to measure. The first case in which we did use indicators, we measured in a way which is very simple. We measured in terms of distance of people from a full offer of health, education, and railway. So, in a sense, we set aside the old idea of urban and rural in terms of density, which I personally don't find it that useful anymore, and we opted for another issue, which is how far away are people from services. So some people in urban areas are very far away from a full offer of services, and some people in rural areas, because the good politics has been done there, they're quite close to very decent education on health. So we designed, here is the map of Italy. The greener you are, the farthest away you are from a full offer of services. Of course, the greenest areas are in the mountains, in the hills, but also notice in the Padana Valley. These are people living they fell over. They fell into an underdevelopment trap. Okay, this is a novelty that I want to point out. No more density, but distance and accessibility. Then we look at the demographic trend and we discover what you expect. People are running away and moving away from areas where the quality of services is very bad, where Article 3 of Italian Constitution, which says that the state should remove all obstacles that allow people, it sounds like a Martesena, but it was written in 1945, that it should remove all the obstacles that prevent people from living the life they would like to live. This is the wording of our Article 3 of the Constitution. And people, since they are not provided, since the quality of life depends so much on where they were born, they move out. And when they move out, as our British friends, rural policy in Britain has taught us, the land goes. The land is not attended anymore. And the quality of services also deteriorate. Let me just show you, I promise is the last one, interesting information. We built a system of 140, 150 indicators. As this conference is showing, once again, numbers are not scarce. We do have the numbers. The question is, what do we do with them? And we came up by showing that people living in these areas have major problems like being 40, 60, 70 minutes away when they make the call from the emergency, i.e. the emergency mobile system does not arrive before 70 minutes. You are not going to live there, you're not going to settle there, if you're there you move out. So the issue immediately after was what shall we do? How shall we use this information, this design, this vision? It was quite clear that we had to tackle both labor, employment, jobs, which means market in capitalism, and also providing services. None of the two come first. It's both labor and services. And in order to do that, we asked how. And I'm glad you mentioned that work that some of us did. We employed a place-based approach. You might be surprised, Ralph, to learn. We did very, very simple things. We promoted an alliance of the very small municipalities, 4,000 municipalities with 1,800,000 people, 4,000 municipalities, less than 2,000 each. We promoted an alliance among the municipalities. We entrusted the democratically elected mayors of the municipality with the power to make decisions. But we also, quite honest and frankly, without being too worried about being paternalistic, I'll say what we is. We destabilize them. Because they are not sometimes the solution, but they're the cause of the problems. They are the very people who have been interjecting public money and using the money in order not to change, in order to stay as the intermediaries which are needed by the people in order to at least be subsidized. For 20 years, for 30 years, so I completely agree with the issue of saving. There is lots of wasted money there. And we, in order to destabilize them, we brought on the floor hard information on what was wrong. And we pressed them very hardly to give voice to the incumbents, to the migrants. You never see in a focus group the migrants unless you make clear that you want to hear them. And they are sometimes, the share of entrepreneurs in these Italian areas of migrants is higher than the share of the population, of the resident population, because Italy, what does Italy attract? Entrepreneurs. Italy is a country of entrepreneurs. So they are running part of our economy, but they're never heard. Their new ideas are not heard. So we pressed them to make sure that the debate would be informed with indicators and also by them. When I said we, I was not referring to a territorial department, a little niche, a soul-saving territorial department in an otherwise space-blind, classical space-blind policy. I'm talking about little groups coming from the Education Ministry, from the Health Ministry, from the Agriculture Ministry, that come together and through 30,000 kilometers of bus together, 30,000 kilometers of bus together. Our office was a bus, okay? So we were working in a bus. A bus would take us to the places, we would do the focus group, and we would learn each other and develop integrated approach. Okay, that's the integration in a bus. So we did 30,000 kilometers and we designed the policy in doing that. I'm over, where are we now? Well, through this system, by discussing with the people, we selected a smaller set of areas, which I try to show to you, is 61 areas only. And now they are down working at the community level, trying to design what kind of improvement in health, what kind of improvement in education, what kind of improvement of mobility should be done together with policy for agriculture. And they are basing their analysis on indicators, and the indicators that we designed at the beginning will become the targets to be monitored in the follow-up of the process. Keep up with the process on the www.arinternet.it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A telling example of policies in Italy. Thank you very much, Fabrizio. You spoke about destabilization. We will have Governor Ramirez, who is, I think, exactly the opposite. We would ask you, Governor, I just want to say you are, since 2006, Governor, and you have another 3 years to go in your current mandate, and I underline your current mandate, so past and future is yours. Please.
Gracias, Rolf. Thank you, Rolf. Why are we here? Well, because we are the only entity of the country, the only local government that is subject to the evaluation of the OECD along with INEGI has enabled us of the assessment of our management, of our administration, to observe the 9 items that are there to evaluate public policies. Morelos is an entity that is located in the central area of our country, a territory of almost 5,000 square kilometers, and it starts the border to go to the south of the country. Our population, 1,900,000 inhabitants, accounts for an important part of a population that has very interesting vocation in the middle of the country, but that we have a great tragedy, a difficulty of the diagnosis that we carried out that we knew as political players of an entity with a very high index of violence, an entity with high impact crimes, and a condition where security bodies were confused with criminals. I must tell you that Morelos is a neighbor to the state of Guerrero, as I was explaining. In the case of Iguala, a paradigmatic case, talks about our territory where crime had the control of security bodies. A very serious fact and regretful fact for society. The first task we had to undertake during our diagnosis was a social reconciliation strategy in order to guarantee peace and security in our territory. Under an unseen-before policy, an aggressive policy, we launched a social investment program of universal scholarships for 4,500 students of third degree of secondary school and bachelor and university studies, stating that this investment on education is a principle of equity, but also of reconciliation at a social level, giving a different kind of expectation to the young people of this state and this country. We recovered around 20,000 students that were not in the schooling areas, that had been dropped out the school for many different reasons. And this investment that we had carried out in the country, something that had never been seen before, led us that 3% recovered dropouts, 9% did not drop out from bachelor degrees, and our enrollment is growing from 40%, never seen before on the public education system in our country. We also divided the territory, and we identified the polygons where we had more violence. The polygons where high impact were taking place in order to create a prevention policy that would be effective, a policy where we selected within the territory the highest impact crimes, and we explained what was happening on that polygon, and we tried to figure out why so much violence. The first indicator is that we did not have full-time schools. The second indicator is that there were not enough public spaces. Indicator said that many young people did not attend the school and they drop out because of economic reasons. But something that came up and that was relevant was the existence of a higher number of women that had single households. An average in our state is 30% of single mother households. They are heads of family, and in those polygons, the percentage was higher. That is where we built a strategy to stop doing assistance policy and face the challenge to incorporate the single mother households to productive projects. Projects that will enable those mothers to organize themselves and to show their collective strength and build among them productive projects throughout training that we carried out with the Social Development Institution and the Confederation of Labor, Coparmex, in order to train them in business management, creating business, and we have incorporated 10,000 women to these productive activities. The average on assessment that we have carried out, the average of success is 75%. We have started to identify with those women a very important value change in micro companies that are setting the grounds for internal market that we can build throughout that experience that we have carried out to recover this social tissue. Women have a double problem to upbring their families, but they also are backwardness in schooling because they become mothers at a very early age. So they don't have the conditions to have the right income. So you have to incorporate it to productive activities, and then by themselves are empowered as women for the value that they have per se in order to take care of their families throughout those companies. And the scholarships complements the condition, the family circuit, because one or two of their children will receive that universal scholarship, and then they will receive the right income that will enable us to progress as a family. Another important thing was to recover public spaces through our cultural sports. Recovery of public spaces has to deal with the fact that the community will be acknowledged. Wherever you have a profound crisis and you find violence, there is no confidence among the inhabitants of that area. Recovery is to make that public space their own, to empower them, and to create community so they can share their own experiences, their conditions of cultural creation, sport creation, and they start building their personality of its own neighborhood. And that bad attributes that they have is changing, and now they have this proud of the sense of community and that what and all the activities they can achieve through it. I've told you that it was shameful to have this kind of high violence in our country. We granted our municipality activities of public surveillance. But those police officers under the responsibility of municipality are found in the payrolls of organized crime. That condition that prevails in many parts of the country was observed specifically in Morelos. So we retook the command of the municipal police under a single commander of police officers. That is under the Constitution, and quite recently the National Commissioner of Security has told the deputies that were met in what meeting in Congress that that model has to be implemented because of the results that we obtained in Morelos by reducing crime rates. It is not about establishing a policy of policy order or a policy that will enable us to build an instrument of confidence for the security of our citizens, but it is also necessary to have the social arm that will reveal confidence. You cannot get rid of criminality if you don't give education. You cannot tell the young people to incorporate to the fulfillment of life when their expectation of a study cannot be provided by the government. So if they are rejected, if they are criminalized, your tissue cannot be recovered. If you don't grant women the empowerment and the possibilities as gender, the, the right to rebuild social tissue. So police model is accompanied by all these social actions. And INEGI has rated us on perception. And perception is very important. Perception on security has grown 3 points. To grow 3 points in 2 decades of violence in a state like the one I govern, in which I head, are very 3 valuable points. It has taken us a lot of effort to be there. And this effort that has been assessed by the OECD is very important because we are subject that these policies to be measured and to correct whatever is necessary throughout the assessment of public policies. And I will conclude by saying this administration is not to give an acknowledgement to the government, but it is aiming to build a society with rights. If we don't empower society in the right to live with security, the right to have school, the right of women of a decent and productive life and income, if we don't have those rights of society to conquer its own society, well, nothing can be achieved. The most important thing of administration is to have a strong society by building a society of rights.
Governor, thank you very much. Thank you very much for a, again, very passionate plaidoyer for policies that have to start with taking a hard look at what is the key issue in your state. Thank you very much. And I now call on David Medina, who is, just to remind us, the co-founder and chief operating officer of an NGO, if I'm qualifying it right, Results for America. David has been working for quite a while in the White House in the United States. He is now in an NGO business, and I'm very interested to share, that you share with us what's your experience from work in cities that are particularly relevant. Please, David.
Thank you, Ralph, and thanks to the organizers for putting today's conference together. Gracias a todos que organizado en esta conferencia tan importante.
Well, thank you very much for doing this in the land of my parents, actually. Soy David Medina y estoy con
We're a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., and we have one simple but important mission, and that is to work with leaders at all levels of government to use data and evidence to improve people's lives. And so today I just want to briefly describe for you 4 exciting bipartisan initiatives that we're engaged in right now, and hopefully you will join us in these efforts. First, when we started this organization a few years ago, we realized that there was no think tank or organization in the U.S. building a grassroots campaign to get the general public to call on their leaders to use data and evidence to improve lives. And so we created one. It's called Moneyball for Government. It's based on the book by Michael Lewis and the movie with Brad Pitt, which describes how the Oakland A's became one of the best teams in baseball by using data and statistics rather than the hunches of their scouts. And so our campaign is based on 3 principles. First, we call on all leaders to build evidence of what works. Secondly, call on leaders to invest in what works. And third, to shift public dollars away from programs that consistently fail to achieve desired outcomes. So pretty straightforward principles. But we wanted to make sure that this campaign and these ideas were accessible to the general public. And so we actually published a book called Moneyball for Government, which became a national bestseller in the US on Amazon. It featured bipartisan chapters by the top budget, policy, and economic advisors to Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama. We got so much positive traction from that book that we started reaching out to local, state, and federal leaders to ask them to publicly support our principles and publicly support our campaign. And we've gotten tremendous feedback on that so far. Most recently, we've announced that the two last Treasury Secretaries, Hank Paulson and Bob Rubin, have agreed to support this campaign, calling all leaders at all levels to use data and evidence to improve lives. You can find more information about this one effort at moneyballforgov.com. So that's how we engage the general public, but let me just briefly describe 3 initiatives that we're undertaking to engage elected officials directly. In April of this year, we announced a What Works Cities initiative. That's the newest effort by Bloomberg Philanthropies to help local governments build the infrastructure they need to be able to use data and evidence to improve the lives of their residents. It's a $42 million effort over 3 years. The goal is to help at least 100 mid-sized cities in the US, so those cities with residents between 100,000 and 1 million. And so at the end of this period, this will be the largest effort ever undertaken in the US to build the infrastructure within local governments, working with mayors to invest in what works. So we're very excited about that. This initiative has 5 different components that are complementary. So we're helping cities develop open data policies, to create performance management systems, stat systems, to perform low-cost evaluations of their targeted programs, to enact results-driven procurement reform, and finally, to identify and shift funds away from programs that consistently fail to achieve results. So we think that these are the 5 components working together that will make government more effective, more efficient, but also more importantly at the end of the day to improve people's lives. We've developed a set of 5 world-class organizations who are leading this effort. My organization, Results for America, is managing it on behalf of Bloomberg Philanthropies. But we have the Center for Government Excellence at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. We have the Government Performance Lab at Harvard University in Cambridge. The Sunlight Foundation, based in Washington, D.C., is helping with this, as well as the Behavioral Insights team from the UK. We announced the first 8 cities who are participating in this initiative in August. 2 of them include Tulsa, which we're helping develop citywide strategic goals for the first time, indicators along with those goals, as well as their first ever open data policy. Just a few weeks ago, we announced that Jackson, Mississippi, in the heart of the Deep South in the US, issued by executive order through the mayor a new, very robust open data policy. And we're also helping the city of Seattle perform low-cost evaluations of their interventions helping the homeless. So it'll be multi-sector, it'll multi-issue, and hopefully at the end of the day will impact cities in all 50 of our states. As of today, 115 of our cities within this eligibility criteria have applied to be a part of this program in 40 states. So we're very excited about that. You can get more information about that initiative at whatworkscities.org. Third, and the second way that we've been able to engage elected officials is by creating what we call a Federal Invest in What Works Index. Again, when we started, we realized that no one had ever developed a consensus as to what federal departments and agencies should have in place in order to be able to use data and evidence effectively. So we interviewed more than 70 current and former federal government officials, academics, think tank experts, and others, and developed this index, which has 7 criteria. So these criteria include things like, does the federal department have a chief evaluation officer? Does that department invest at least 1% of their funds in rigorous evaluations? Do they have a What Works clearinghouse so that nonprofits and others can go to a website and find interventions and see what research has been done and whether they're evidence-driven or not. So far, we've released 4 of these indexes. Our last one we released in March, and the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. Department of Labor scored the highest in this index. So from our perspective, they're leading the effort within the federal government to enact the reforms that this whole conference is about. Finally, let me just say that at the international level, we are going to be unveiling this year a new effort to conduct an international global evidence landmark study that looks at how many national governments and state and provincial governments in the world have built this infrastructure, have the people, the policies, and the systems in place in order to be able to use data and evidence. We, as far as we know, a study like this hasn't been performed. We thought it'd be the perfect audience here to let you know that we're working in this area. So if you know of any studies like this, please let us know. We'd like to not reinvent the wheel. And also, if you have examples of any of your governments implementing these infrastructures, please let us know at our website, resultsforamerica.org, or I think we've shared our contact info with all of you. So let me just pause there again and thank again Rolf and the organizers for a great conference so far.
Thank you very much. David, thank you very much for reminding us that there is also an issue of not just money, not just the data, but also the capacity. And I'd like to come back to that question right here. But as I had said, you have seen quite a number of questions coming up here. I still would like to invite the audience to come up with questions and comments so far, because I think that rich presentation of real-life experiences must entice a lot of people to make comments. And I see the first one just here in front of me, first row, and the second gentleman. Would we have the, please, the microphones? No, do we? Please, just first row. It's coming, sir. Just a second. And then, gentlemen. Here. Three. Please, if you would present yourself, if you stand up so everybody can see you, and then perhaps also, please, short questions and short comments. Thank you very much. No. Oh, we need it. Jeez, what's what?
I come from a media from Morelos, from which Mr. Graco Ramirez heads. We have a portal that's called Periodism Without Censure. From 1,900,000 inhabitants from the state of Morelos, governed by Mr. Graco Ramirez, I have the honor of asking him a question, because he gives conferences and lectures, but he does not allow to have any questions on life. Sometimes they do not allow us to make questions to him. So once again, it is an honor for me, and it's a great pleasure to have that right of 1,900,000 inhabitants and to be able to ask the governor a question directly. At our state, according to INEGI, has grown, and you will hear the data, because in a statistics class, it has been said that statistics are like bikinis. They show everything except the most important thing. And it turns out to be that in the state of Morelos, in 2 years' time, Poverty grew, yes, and you will hear it properly. 17% of poverty growth. Maybe England would not have 70%, but in the state of Morelos, it grew 17% in 2 years' time. I do recall this administration entering into office as if we had invited Hitler to talk about racism. They come and talk here about poverty, but it grew 70% in the state of Morelos. So I would ask the governor what are the policies that he will be putting into practice to reduce that 70%. It was the worst out of the 32 states where the poverty grew the most. So you can see the data from the INEGI, and what is he going to be doing about that 70% poverty growth in the state? Por favor.
Collect a few questions. And the fourth, and then we'll just stop and we'll let the panel respond. Please, sir.
Muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Arturo Fragoso, del Instituto de Estudios de Gestión Pública.
From Public Management School. This is for the Governor Greco Ramirez. This inclusion of a teenager that had been rejected not because of his high level of performance, school performance, cannot have people that graduate with very low competitiveness, and this would create additional problems?
Please.
Buenas tardes, soy Cuauhtémoc Anda.
I am Cuauhtémoc Anda. I would like to congratulate the Governor Grato Ramirez because he had just made a wonderful exposure. I live in the state of Mexico in a very neighboring area of Cuernavaca, and I feel really sorry that in recent years the news that we received from his state were very sad. Quite recently I attended to give a lecture in a school in his state. I was accompanied by my wife, and we were very happy to see that things had changed and that things looked quite well. So I said, one of these days I'll ask the governor about it. So I think that if he has said right now it is correct, and I have no doubt that it is true, it is a huge step forward. Congratulations.
And the gentleman here, the last of this row, but then we can perhaps do another one.
Hi.
Please.
Sorry. José Luis Palacios.
José Luis Palacios, senior consultant at a private industry.
Exactly, which are could you please outline the policies that actually save money, that have to do with well-being? Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll just perhaps let first the governor respond, and then I guess David, you will some comments on that one, and please, if the other members would like to make a statement on that as well, great. Otherwise, we continue with a few questions here. Please, Governor Ramirez.
Thank you very much. Regarding the question, in Coneval INEGI survey on the 5 indicators that are measured: access to health, access to education, access to food and housing, these indicators, the state of Morelos grew. Where the person that is questioning is talking about poverty growth, it is the indicator that is related to income. Income from 120,000 inhabitants of Morelos out of 1,900,000. In that indicator, yes, we ranked low because 2 reasons that I can explain. The first of them was to stop a policy of real estate construction that were employing the lowest layer of construction workers to have an income. And this was depleting with an entity of those that know Morelos has a privileged nature asset in the country. These real estate projects were stopped, and we enable a policy of 30,000 housing construction as it should be done, with guarantees and not to deplete the territory of a state with biodiversity. And yes, it so happened that on the incomes we rank lower according to the 500,000 survey, because we stopped that construction industry, but we are taking it to another level, and not as a predator as it was being used. On natural resources where displaced people because of cyclone and violence have come to live to our state. Along with Moneyball and the survey with INEGI, we are trying to identify where that survey took place, and we are undertaking a selective policy to improve the income of those sectors that have been incorporated in these last 3 years in our state, according to the survey that was published last year. Regarding universality of education, it is not to demerit education, because quality education has been improved. When you are in an entity, at a territory where you have a demographic bonus, such as the one that we have in the country, and we're talking from local to domestic, I talk about local to influence a national model. And education is not considered as an alternative. I do believe that young people that do not have access to that education, unfortunately, will be moving either to addiction or crime. It is much more expensive to have a young people in a prison, that's 200 pesos per day, or to try to reestablish him from drugs, that to pay a scholarship. Talking about the experience of this morning, where young demonstrators demand good quality education in Chile, when you have access to education that has been already guaranteed, I think that we are implementing the Council of Human Capital, or that advice of human capital. We are agreeing of this human capital model, so the competencies of the education in Morelos will be complemented by a strategy that has to do with good quality students under competencies that will enable us to give them access to productive life, and not only see the perspective of obtaining a degree. We are implementing this according to the recommendations forwarded by the OECD, and we are creating our board of human capital jointly with the companies, entrepreneurs, government, academia. So those competences will enable them to have access to productive life. The other important part of perception on security is not a problem of willingness to have the state of law. The economic cause of corruption in this country, and that affects the confidence, is also what has to do with violence. And violence makes investment fly away. And if the investment flies away, then you have violence, and then you have criminality. So the perception that was being mentioned of a person that visited Morelos quite recently, where the perception of security is increasing, investments are increasing, and now we are having an influence from local to national. In the reconstruction of social tissue and crime prevention, Morelos is according to the policy of polygons that we established and the model of police officers that we are stating to control 32 police, and that this stop blaming each other and nobody taking care of security. We have 32 responsible and accountable governments and a country that's responsible for it. This must become much more transparent and much more accountable. The one that appears among the 5 indicators of Coneval and INEGI, we do have the one on income. That has to do with economy and a model that we have changed because it was wrong to the lowest layers of society that were hired by construction companies to deplete our land.
Please.
So
you will tell us about what can be saved.
Some policies that can save money.
Yes.
Now look, it depends on the context. It depends on the country, clearly. But let me just run through quickly a set of things that we thought about in the UK. A few years ago under Tony Blair, I was culture minister. I was minister for culture and minister for universities also. And a statistic was coming up that we couldn't quite understand. And it was that 40% of the jobs that our young people currently in primary school education would do in the future had not yet been invented. We forget that, Twitter wasn't around 10 years ago. None of us knew what a hashtag was. And so preparing these young people for the world at work means encouraging them to be imaginative and to not just expect to work for someone else in the modern economy. There you find areas like arts, education, which actually in all countries' budgets tends to be the smallest. The arts and culture budget is the smallest bit, but yet when you look at the contribution it can make in schools and education and expanding the mind, when you look at the contribution it can make in health and health therapies, it's absolutely the area where you should invest. The smallest budget for the largest gains. Something else that needs to come into the school curriculum, coding. Too many of us use the computer and our technologies, but we haven't got a clue how it works. Get coding going into schools, relatively easy. Companies like Google, very keen to help with big schemes now across the world. Microsoft, another one, relatively inexpensive. Solar panels on our roofs, particularly generate a lot of energy and save money. We're sitting here in Mexico. Oh my God, the sun is fantastic. We would love to see this in London. So retrofit solar panels on your public buildings, save money, and generate your own energy. Encourage people to cycle. Right across the developed world, you're seeing people returning to bikes. You need, of course, to follow the roots of the Scandinavian, particularly the Dutch, on making cycling safe. But my God, it saves money and it stops the obesity problem, which is engulfing, literally, so many of our countries. Get people onto bikes. Countries tend to want to invest in old infrastructure. Build me a train line. Get me a train. Build me a road. Actually invest in the new infrastructure, broadband speed. I'm trying to get 4G in Mexico. It's proving hard. It's the new infrastructure, not the old infrastructure, that will provide the new jobs. And for all of our economies, It's about thinking, where are the new companies? Why is it, frankly, that the new companies that we rely on so much are largely based in California? It's because they got the intellectual property framework right about 20 years ago. That's why Google, that's why Yahoo, that's why Twitter, that's why Facebook came out of that ecology in that part of the United States. For all countries that want to own the future, think about your intellectual property. That's not money, that's just laws to make sure that innovation is supporting your entrepreneurs, you're making things happen so you can produce the wealth of the future and hopefully the well-being of all of us.
Thank you very much.
There's a list.
Thanks a lot. I hope that was a good answer, sir. And I understand that Fabrizio would also like to make a comment on these questions.
No, I have an answer. I just give another example, a classical example, an easy one. During the 30,000 kilometers trip around the country, we saw again and again hospitals with mobilization of people created by local leaders, follow me on that, claiming that the closing of the hospitals was wrong. Now, sometimes it was, some other times it was not. The hospitals was an inappropriate solution for the care and the health of the people. If you look at the numbers, you discover that the number of inappropriate hospitalization of elderly people who are not being taken care of in their house through house caring, which is the thing to do these days, it's enormous. Why are they still around? Because the local leaders consider the hospitals not as a source of well-being for their citizens, but a source of income for themselves, because it creates jobs, okay? So they resist the closing. So it's delicate when you go around doing these jobs, and if you do that, and if you move the discussion of the people at local level to what is that what you want? You want somebody to deliver a baby in an area where there have been only 100 babies delivered every year, which, as you know, is under the 500 which is necessary to be safe. No, you don't want that. But you need to open a public debate, because you cannot go around the country and close hospitals. You need to go to the people and say, what is the ultimate purpose you want? You want the good caring you want them to be attended and not after the 12th week, for example, which is another classical measure of outcome. So you can save, you can have the wrong people out of the job, the one who have been getting the money to keep the hospital because they wanted the job, and you can improve the quality of the people living in the area. But for that to happen, you need to create dialogue, heated dialogue, and informed dialogue at local level. Otherwise, you have top-down policies which go nowhere.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'll take the decision that I think we should have perhaps a few other questions. After all, this is a very interesting dialogue. The type of dialogue that you see is probably part of well-being. So, Madam, if you would like to ask your question, please. And just say who you are. So that
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. I am Gladys Martinez. I am Gladys Martinez, professor from the ITESO in Guadalajara, and I have a question for Governor, Mr. Governor Graco Ramirez. You were a diputado, a representative, you were a senator as well. You were a leader of the PRD, your party, and so what actions did you take from all these trusted positions to raise your voice and to stop the infiltration of organized crime in your state? Or was it that you realized about the problem now that you are governor?
Gentleman here, and maybe the very at the end. Please, sir. No, it's coming.
Salvador Velázquez, to all the forum. How to apply policies to all the people in an equality way will that depend on the different type of necessity in each and every region or the specific need of the population? In general, what are the priorities? Is there any equality?
Thank you. And then there was the last one at the back there. At the back.
Sir, would you get up?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. What Dr. Claudia Serrano shared with us was very interesting. And territorial equation, would that have to do with vicinity or the neighborhood, rather with respect to families? And I would like to share with you that 10 or 12 years ago, in Mexico, there was an implementation of a similar policy with service providing entities at rural level, at state level, therefore providing services to smaller communities. And this idea of the territorial cohesion notion has to do with something similar. I agree with your idea in terms of territorial inequality, and I think that it is something very, very interesting in order to drop the levels of poverty in the rural environment as well as in suburban areas as well. Thank you.
It's your age that makes you qualify, please. Please.
Mi nombre es Isaac.
I am Isaac Lopez Moreno. I am a university student at Universidad de Guadalajara, and my question is for Claudia Serrano. Now, with respect to policies in order to close the inequality gaps, I want to know whether, now that you are here, could you please share something that has had a good response, either in Chile or elsewhere in another member country of the OECD?
Claudia, are those two questions? Maybe you start off with that one, and then perhaps I'd like to have a comment on the question of priority and equality. I think that's an interesting one as well. Please, Claudia.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for the two questions that you posed to me. I think that they are very interesting. I will start with the second one. Now, policies in order to close the gap on equality, territorial inequality gap. I have several examples, however, none is a magic wand. And they, of course, have to do with the Chilean reality. They are trial and error, and of course we are learning time and again in order to do things better. Chile is a long, thin country, and the far end, since it is so far away from highly populated regions and due to geographic characteristics, are areas that have territorial inequalities and vulnerabilities. Therefore, the concept of small isolated regions or extreme regions in our country has been a priority for policies for closing the gaps. Now, policies consist on encouragement for public officials, and as well as examples like health policies in the Chiloé Island, where the distance in order to have access to constant supply or attention in the event of accident or disease was huge. And what was decided several years ago was to create a general service entity at Chiloé, not Puerto Mondo, where the capital is, with a closer delivery scheme for the people who live in the islands. And like these, there are many other examples that mix territorial concepts with inequality concepts and some other attributes, like the education for poor children that considers whether a child lives in a particularly poor region, and it has its particular measurement with respect to the individual, to the parents, to the socio-demographic reality. But it has a scoring portion that is additional, because it is understood that if you belong to that vulnerable territory, it has an effect on opportunities. Of course, I could share more and more examples, but I think that this will suffice. Now, first question, I am going to talk about territorial cohesion. There are two words here. Territorial, because we have been talking about local, regional, states, etc. And so territorial is a little more analytic, and it could be something opposite, because it is real. The rest are political administrative notions, and the territory is actually there with the landscape, with the reality, with the life. But it is analytic because it is a social building, it is a process, it is a constellation of stakeholders, agreements, capacities of people, and that is a potential that exists. So when we talk about territorial cohesion, we facilitate that contradictory capacity. Is not linear. That does not mean that people will share the same project, etc. But on the long run, we will do, because if we have a horizon, if we have a territorial scope, if we can organize our potential and minimize your weaknesses in order to be feasible, then it is a long-term view that takes this tuning up towards the future, shared future. And the starting point is the conviction that there are differences, there are not uniformities that are not acceptable. That is what I was saying, that territorial policy is not against the states, but it is by the countries, that territories can develop up in an optimum way, because then the country wins, not only the territory. So even though it might seem contradictory, this type of territorial cohesion is at a nationwide level.
David, you wanted to come in? No, you. Yes,
Great.
the other day.
Yeah, I just had a couple of other examples and answers to the question about what governments can do to save money, but more importantly, to save lives. In the U.S., in Louisville, Kentucky, they distributed free asthma inhalers that had GPS trackers so that they could find where in the city people were having asthma attacks that were forcing them to go to emergency rooms and costing the city money. So they've been tracking all that data and then figuring out what was causing that air pollution in those neighborhoods, again, to save money, but more importantly, to improve the well-being of their residents. And in New Orleans, they're using predictive analytics to reduce the number of deaths through fires in people's homes. So they looked at years worth of data to see what neighborhoods had the highest percentages of home fires. And then they went with the fire department and volunteers and distributed free smoke alarms to everyone in the neighborhood. And they believe that that will save lives, save money, and address other local needs with the money they would have invested in more resources for the fire department. So there's a lot of exciting work going on at the local level all around the world. And so I think this conference is very timely.
Thank you very much. Governor, you would like to say an answer, please?
Sí, cómo no.
Well, yes. What we have been saying here with respect to territories and to find those polygons inside the territory allows us to create these very pertinent policies for those territorial crises, and therefore build public policies starting from the empowerment of society. That is number one. And number two, with respect to what David was saying, is that in the reality of Morelos, we have discovered another local experience, that is that After 40 years of having research centers that are of relevance, 2,000 researchers in the National Researchers System in Mexico and several research awards, we now have in Morelos a proposal to build the knowledge technology. I mean, these seem to be isolated ideas, disconnected from the local population. Now we have a raised synergy with alternatives, with green alternatives, and after a long time, I can share with you that I've been able to show that in Morelos we have a reality, a very interesting reality. 177 patents this year, and these patents that are resulting from research set the base for linkages in order to build this economy of knowledge. It was economy of knowledge. And so this is the reality of an entity or a state that had so much research. And so from the local level, we can build a nationwide policy because we did not have these alternatives. We had all these awards, all these centers, but no linkage with investment. And another thing that is relevant here is the one that has to do with the specific question on whether didn't I realize what was going on in Morelos until I took office as governor. Of course, I mean, I am a political stakeholder. I was elected democratically. And if someone raised his hand talking about the linkage or the bond of governors or government members with crime, was me. And of course, I took all the risks inherent to that, and that's why I'm governor, and that's why in Morelos we've started to embrace a security model now that authority is not an accomplice of criminals. And if we follow a war paradigm against crime, if we combat with that paradigm criminalization and fighting this war, we will only have corruption that will be evident that the main drug dealer left the most secure jail walking with no problem. I mean, that's the degree of the absurd of this war against crime that has to do with the wrong paradigm of criminalization, and we need to put that under different terms on public health and whether to question if that is the way to move forward. I have been strongly committed to fight in favor of security, and not today, for many years already.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very fascinating, I think, diving into the reality of what we call well-being. I really appreciate, I admire the way that you presented these very specific experiences, the answers, the difficulties, and all of this in a great dialogue. So thank you very much to the excellent panel. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Muchas gracias a nuestros panelistas.
Well, let's give them a round of applause and thank them.
Thank you all with this applause. Señoras y señores, tenemos un anuncio. Si encuentra usted un iPhone 4S color negro en un estuche negro, favor de entregarlo en la cabina de sonido o entréguelo a una de nuestras edecanes. Please, if you find a black iPhone 4S in a black case, please bring it to the sound booth or give it to a hostess, please. Todos están invitados a una cena especial en el magnífico Hospicio Cabañas. Les ofrecemos transporte de ida y vuelta, por lo que les invitamos a salir por el frente de la expo para poder llevarlos. All you are invited to attend the dinner at Hospicio Cabañas. Transportation to the dinner and back will be provided. Please exit to the front of the expo, where you will be directed to the transportation. Tomorrow the forum will start at 9 a.m. at meeting rooms A, B, and D located on the upper level. There will be morning seminars starting at 8. Capacity is limited. The forum organizers wish you a wonderful evening. Mañana la plenaria comienza a las 9, pero desde las 8 habrá seminarios en los salones A, B y D. En el piso